You know, we've all heard those horror stories about homeowners going to war with their HOAs. But what happens when you do everything right? You follow all the rules, you get written approval, and then, boom, 5 years later, you're in a legal fight anyway. Well, that's exactly what happened to a homeowner named Don France, and his story has a lesson for anyone who thinks just being right is enough to win.
Okay, so the story starts out super simple. It's 2014, and Don France wants to build a shelter for his RV, so he does everything by the book, submits his plans, goes through all the right channels, and he gets official written approval from his HOA, a total green light.
And then you fast forward 5 years, and the very same HOA that gave him that green light hits him with a $500 fine for the exact same structure. So yeah, approved in 2014, fined in 2019.
So what on earth changed? I mean, how does a project that was totally approved suddenly become a violation? That is the million-dollar question here, and it's what this whole case is about.
So first, let's dig into how this really straightforward approval somehow spiraled into a full-blown legal battle that wound up in front of a judge. When you look at the timeline, you can see this wasn't just some sudden blow-up. I mean, after he got approval in 2014, things were quiet for years. Then, in 2018, something shifts, and the HOA's attitude totally changes. A year after that, the first violation notice lands on his doorstep, followed by the fine. And it took all the way until September of 2020 to even get a formal hearing. This thing was a long, slow burn.
To really get where Mr. France is coming from, we have to go all the way back to that original approval in 2014 and look at exactly what the HOA signed off on.
Okay, so from Mr. France's point of view, his case was cut and dry. He applied, he promised to follow the rules, and the Architectural Review Committee, the ARC, they reviewed his plans. Now, this next part is absolutely critical. The person who was chair of the ARC at the time was specifically told that a gate wasn't required for this kind of structure. So based on that understanding, the HOA gave its final stamp of approval, and he built the shelter exactly as they approved it, which was without a gate.
For years, everything was totally fine. But then the HOA's whole approach just shifted. This is really the turning point where what seemed like a settled issue suddenly became a huge problem.
So, why the sudden 180? Well, according to testimony from an HOA board member, the association was starting to feel the pressure. Apparently, other residents were threatening to sue them if they didn't start enforcing their own rules, the CC&Rs.
And here's the kicker. This wasn't a new rule they just made up. The requirement for a gate had been in the CC&Rs the whole time. The HOA had just been, well, overlooking it. But around 2018, that all changed. They started telling residents, hey, you have until 2019 to get in line.
And just to make things even more complicated, Mr. France was kind of caught between a rock and a hard place. He had two sets of similar rules coming at him. The HOA's rules required a 6-foot gate, but the City of Mesa also had its own code about screening RVs. So he was getting heat from both sides over the very same issue.
So faced with this fine for something that had been totally okayed before, Mr. France and his lawyer built their entire defense around a pretty powerful legal idea.
And that idea is called estoppel. Now, that sounds complicated, but the concept is actually pretty simple. Estoppel basically means you can't go back on your word. If you tell someone something is okay and they rely on that and take action, you're estopped or blocked from coming back later and saying, actually, that's not okay, and trying to penalize them for it. This was the absolute heart of Mr. France's case. He argued that because the HOA explicitly approved his plans without a gate back in 2014, they were legally prevented or estopped from turning around in 2019 and fining him for not having one. I mean, it sounds like a slam dunk argument, right?
So the case finally makes it in front of an administrative law judge. Both sides lay out their case. The homeowner presents his whole estoppel argument, and the HOA makes its case for why it needs to enforce the rules.
So this brings us to the moment of truth. After hearing everything, did the judge agree with Mr. France? Was the HOA legally blocked from enforcing that rule because of what they did back in 2014? And this is where the story takes a massive, unexpected twist. The judge never actually made a decision on the estoppel argument. Not at all. The central pillar of Mr. France's entire defense wasn't even considered in the final ruling. So how in the world does that happen? Well, the whole decision came down to a critical mistake in the paperwork. Let's just follow the judge's logic here. Step 1. The official legal petition filed by Mr. France claimed that the HOA was the one violating its own rule. But Step 2, when they got to the hearing, Mr. France admitted that wasn't really his argument. His real argument was about estoppel. So the judge's conclusion was simple.
You have to prove what you claim in your official petition. And since he couldn't prove the HOA violated its own rule, the judge just dismissed the entire case on a technicality.
And the takeaway here is just, wow. It's fascinating. Mr. France might have had a completely winning argument with his estoppel claim. The judge never said it was a bad argument or that he was wrong. But he lost. He lost because the legal paperwork, the official petition he filed, it alleged the wrong thing. He claimed the HOA broke a rule, when his real argument was that the HOA shouldn't be allowed to enforce that rule against him in the first place. It was a fatal technicality.
And this whole thing just leaves us with a really provocative question to think about. This case wasn't decided on fairness or on who was morally in the right. It was decided on procedure. It just highlights this stark reality of the legal system. Sometimes it doesn't matter how perfect your argument is if you don't file the perfect paperwork.